Jordan was excited when he bought the magazine. The headline of the magazine, a scientific test regarding mathematics. Jordan was excited by the premise. They were going to have 3 teams, build 3 houses. Of course, these are dollhouse-sized houses. They were to be built on a table. They were all given the exact same materials to build the house, and identical tables, and an identical time period. Jordan read the article, but he skimmed through it, and he wasn't exactly sure if this was 1 day or 2 day contest. But at any result, he was very disappointed. The article started out with a description of the 3 teams. The 3 teams were going to be 2 mathematic teams from differing schools, and 1 team that did not believe in mathematics, but instead believed in freedom of thought and freedom of choice of action. Jordan was a little distressed by the pictures of the article. Of course, the anti-mathematics team were very youthful, good-looking, athletic, whereas the 2 pro-mathematic teams really did not look like respectable people. The 1 team looked rather unwashed, unemployed, perhaps homeless. And the second pro-mathematics team looked, well, eccentric. One of the team members was very large, to put it kindly, and the other one was just odd-looking, perhaps cross-eyed, Jordan wondered. But the description of the teams and their beliefs really made Jordan shake his head. Of course, he knew what the results would be. The first pro-mathematics team was enthusiastic about their chances in the contest. They were from The Boy is a Pig is a Rat mathematics school. The article went on to describe their beliefs. Their beliefs were a belief of proportion. They would have a rat brought to the field, and the rat would be weighed on a kind of a homemade seesaw-like scale with materials. Certain lengths would be cut based on the weight of the rat. And then they had a grapefruit. The grapefruit was sectioned, and each section of the grapefruit, once the fruit was removed and eaten, of course, would be filled with sand. These portions of sand would be combined in various ways in order to make lesser weights, and then similar portions of wood would be cut to match the weight of these samples of sand. Then these portions of wood would be the units. So the very small, short sections of wood measured and balanced with sand from the grapefruit sections would be the base unit, the smallest unit of measurement. The rat would be a larger unit, and then certain doubling or trebling of the rat unit would provide longer units of length. And so pieces of wood were cut according to these measurements immediately as the team began. And then they began fitting these odd sections together in ways that seemed to them to have some sort of logic. Jordan just shook his head as he saw the pictures of their building as it was being constructed. The second team was from the Reformed School of Mathematics that Jordan had some experience with. This was the institution that had sponsored the mathematics clubs at the various public schools, providing them with materials. So, like his students at the mathematics club, this group began with a chant. They were holding hands and looking to the sky, and they were chanting numbers over and over and over. One of them became fixed on a specific number that she exclaimed was going to be the number that would be their theme for their house. Jordan was shocked that it was 74. 74 was the number that one of his students had told him was not a number that he could use because it was not mentioned in his book. The specific book that he insisted was the truth for mathematics contained a limited number of numbers. Any numbers that were not mentioned in that book were not to be used, and 74, Jordan sighed, was one of those numbers. And here this woman was exclaiming that 74 would be her theme. And she was apparently in a kind of ecstasy as she was repeating 74 over and over. Pictures showed her on her knees, tears streaming from her eyes, as the caption read, 74, 74, I believe, I believe. Jordan was shaking his head as he watched the progress of their building. They were building and cutting just without any regard to measurement or proportion, just according to however they felt things should be. They argued incessantly, and their house looked as odd as they did. There wasn't a right angle in the entire place. The roof sagged to one side because one team member thought that side of the roof should be flat, whereas the other team members had built the other side of the roof with a pitch. So the roof just didn't quite fit the edges of the house. One side of the house was much longer than the other, giving it sort of a trapezoidal kind of shape. And everywhere they were writing random numbers on the wood itself. The numbers didn't have anything to do with length or width or distance or anything. They were just random numbers being written on the wood. The team members explained that these numbers would protect the structure. The numbers would give the structure strength. The numbers had been proven by generation after generation. Jordan just could not understand how these people could be so lost. And then he saw something interesting. They were taking objects like a tape measure, a calculator. They were taking these objects and setting them in certain places. And then they would kneel and chant. And then they would move them somewhere else. And the article explained that in primitive times, people would move these objects about the house, believing that magically they would preserve the house and they would somehow prevent disaster. And of course the magazine talked on and on and on about all the many failures in the past when people used to believe in mathematics for engineering and for architecture, and how bizarre it was that people could believe that mathematics had something to do with science. And of course the team that was anti-mathematics, the team that was supposedly for freedom of thought and freedom of action, were building a beautiful looking house. All the sides were symmetrical, and they used simple proportion methods to do this. And they had obviously practiced some sort of form. They were clearly cutting accurate lengths, positioning them in rehearsed ways. And of course they finished hours before the other teams finished. Jordan was shaking his head reading the article, talking about how once you rid yourself of the superstition of mathematics, the freedom that comes enables you to work so much more quickly, so much more accurately, without the oppression of all these other opinions from centuries past, somehow providing a blessing through numerology, pasting of numbers on walls and on paper and on boards, and rubbing objects like tape measures against lengths of board, somehow providing some kind of mystical protection. When the 3 houses were eventually finished, they were submitted through a series of tests, shaking of the table, and pouring water on it from a hose to check for waterproof. They were shining lights around it and checking for how well sealed the house was for light as well as for water. And of course the pro-mathematics teams were miserable failures, whereas the anti-mathematics team was a brilliant success. It really made Jordan think. It really made Jordan think about his own age and all the different churches that all vied for attention, all preaching something different. It really made Jordan think that he was really being guided for a specific purpose throughout all this. The party. Jordan enjoyed going to parties. He enjoyed socializing with people, trying to distract himself from the miserable circumstance that this world had been placed, and the easy solution to so many problems, but the obstinance that people had, obtuse attitudes, completely unwilling to listen to the possibility that so many of their solutions might lay with an applied use of proper mathematics. So one time at a party, Jordan was greatly distressed when an engineer walked in and immediately became celebrated by almost everybody at the party. Jordan could not help but hear the engineer exclaiming how he had just completed his first bridge, completely designed and built, free of the use of superstition of mathematics. Everyone was cheering him, and Jordan was just shocked thinking about this bridge. The engineer was talking about how in the past he was so restricted as to how to design the bridge, as to how the bridge must be built, because he had to obey all these arbitrary and archaic restrictions, all these guides and laws and codes written by people who were not there. They could not see the river he was building a bridge over. They could not see the abutments that he was planning. They could not see the challenges he was facing. And yet these books were supposed to somehow guide him to build a better product? It was insanity. The engineer talked again about zero, how the numbers, some of the numbers, even zero meant nothing, and that so many of the numbers did not even appear in the book, and yet he was still supposed to believe in them, and still supposed to use them, even though they did not appear in any of his resource books. He said that's what really got him to really accept freedom, was the fact that so many of these numbers he was supposed to believe in, but they were not in any of his books. And the number 0, which was the ultimate absurdity. Nothing. Nothing being used again and again. 1200. A 1 and a 2 and a nothing and a nothing. How absurd it was. And everyone laughed and slapped him on the back. And he built it completely free of any code, of any guide, of any inspection, of any inspector, of any historical precedence at all. Completely free, an individual bridge, an individual death trap, Jordan thought. Jordan started looking around at the house in which he was standing. And he started imagining that these people were living lives as if they hated nails. And they were struggling inside each of their homes to remove the nails that offended them. And as the house began to collapse, they would blame the collapse on the fact that there's more nails hidden in that section that collapsed. And they would search, and they would be right. And they would celebrate when they found these nails that were still in the section that had collapsed. And they would search the house for more and more nails until everything was gone, everything was collapsed, and all of them were living in filth, exposed to the wind and the rain, completely stripped of all humanity and reduced to animal state. It was a war against truth. It was a war against cognition. It was a war against debate and discussion that he was witnessing. All in the name of individual freedom. Sometimes the struggle that he was experiencing was overwhelming, as if he were a tiny mouse pushing against a huge semi-trailer truck that had somehow lost its brakes and was slowly beginning to slip backwards, out of control. It seemed hopeless. But then Jordan thought there was something he could do. There was somewhere he could turn to get strength for this task. That others had somehow faced hopeless tasks like this, and yet achieved victory. He thought that there was a way that he could do this. But still, his eyes were not open yet, and he still couldn't yet see what lay just beyond his reach.